Hello and welcome to the Non-Perfect Parents Club podcast. I'm Emma, a mama of two girls, an ex-nursery practitioner and the creator of the Non-Perfect Parents Club. The Non-Perfect Parents Club is all about support, honesty, truths, acknowledging that none of us can be perfect parents because it's impossible, and basically just speaking the unspoken. The only rule here is no judgment allowed. I love hearing people's stories. I love finding out about other parents, their family dynamics, their values, and how they tick. So that is what this podcast is going to be. Some great honest conversations about parenting, hopefully delving into some nitty-gritty thoughts and feelings that will make us all laugh, cry, and sigh a big sigh of relief. This episode is sponsored by Stingray's Swim School from 315 Health Club in Lancaster.
Places are available for swimming with Stingray's Swim School at 315 Health Club in Lancaster now. With group lessons suitable for babies from 9 weeks old through to school starts and older too. And with flexible ways to pay. Your child can develop their water confidence and learn to swim whilst having a splashing good time. Find out more. Call 237 315. Drop into 315 Caton Road, Lancaster. Or message the Stingray's 315 Swim School via Facebook.
Hello and welcome back to the Non-Perfect Parents Club podcast. Today I am joined by Emma Benyon, a self-care and motherhood coach and educator. Hi Emma, thank you for joining me. So would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about what you do?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. So I'm Emma, I'm a self-care and motherhood coach and educator, and I support busy mums who are juggling it all from the school run to a career and perhaps also running their own business too. I'm also a mum and a full-time post-16 educator as well. So super busy myself, so I know exactly what it's like. And my absolute passion is helping mums to feel less overwhelmed, to have more clarity, more balance and more energy. And so the thing that I absolutely love to talk about is how self-care can help us do exactly that.
Amazing. And I think self-care, it's one of those topics that we've all heard of, but there's maybe a few misconceptions around what it is. And we often, I think we can feel guilty for thinking it's okay to kind of practice self-care. So yeah, tell us what self-care actually is.
Oh gosh, yeah, that's a big question, isn't it? Because as you said, there's so many preconceptions, there's so much pressure, there's so much, we should be doing it. And ultimately, I think we all know as moms that we should, we know the importance of it. Actually, getting to that point of even caring for ourselves is so difficult because of all the pressures and expectations that are put on us. So when we think about self-care, what it really is that practice of caring for ourselves. It's also how we support and nourish ourselves so that we have an energy tank that is full or even just a little bit full that can help us be resourced for navigating our daily life. We all know that parenthood throws challenges at us daily. We all know that life throws challenges at us, all of the time. There's sometimes a curveball. And ultimately, if we are more resourced and we have filled up that energy tank, we are going to be able to cope with those situations much easier. And instead of coming from a space of being really overwhelmed and perhaps quite impatient, maybe a bit shouty, we can actually deal with those things much easier, or at least have the awareness to be like, I just need to take a breath before I respond to that. So when we think about self-care, ultimately, it's about doing practices, really simple practices, because, often when we talk about self-care, it can be spoken about in a way that actually it costs us money. There's that preconception that it's getting our hair done, getting a spa day, getting our nails done. And ultimately, those things are absolutely lovely. However, they are not achievable every day, every week, every month for most people. So it doesn't need to be those things, and it definitely doesn't need to cost us any money. What it should be is things that we can add in daily to what we're already doing. So we're not adding this extra thing to our to-do list. We're already busy enough as it is. We need to be realistic about that. And actually, then adding anything to the bottom of that is just like, how do I even get there? How do I do that? And ultimately, if that thing at the bottom of your to-do list is to care for yourself, it's always going to be at the bottom because we're never going to get there because of everything else. So it's adding really, really simple things in. So when I talk about self-care, it's things that we can do simply, it's things we can do with ease, and ultimately it's things that bring us joy. That's going to be different for every single person because all of our lives are so different. Where we're at in our season of motherhood is different. How it is this week for us is different. And so we need to work in a way that works for us right now.
Yeah, there's some really interesting things you've mentioned there. And I think some of the things you said, it's so hard when you're in the thick of motherhood to kind of put yourself first, think that it's okay to put yourself first without feeling guilty. You become sort of consumed by being a parent and your children, that it can often, you can be in this place of having put yourself to the bottom without even realizing sometimes. And it's just, what I'm trying to say is, how do you make time for yourself? And I kind of want to get across to our listeners, because this is something that I've had to learn, and it's taken me ages to learn and not feel guilty for it, that it's not selfish to put yourself first. And like you've kind of already mentioned, that if you're you're looking after yourself, then you notice the difference in all areas of your life. And like when you're parenting, you may be not quite as shouty, or you don't feel as stressed because you're doing something that lights you up. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of touch on that a little bit and get across why it's not selfish to put yourself first.
Absolutely, because it is such a common preconception, isn't it? That taking that time, especially that time that is, where you're on your own and there isn't any interruptions. And I think ultimately when we think about self-care, it also doesn't have to be that. Like those practices might be things that you do when your kids are there, or it might be things that you add to, doing those household chores, doing the school run, etc. Because that allotted time, we do feel guilty about taking it because then we're not with our kids, we're not present with them. Maybe they miss out on something. Ultimately, we're never going to escape that guilt. Mum guilt, parent guilt is there, and we're not going to escape it. However, taking a bit of time for ourselves is nothing to feel selfish about. And I know that's easier. It's really easy for me to sit here and say that, but it's not, because your children, your partner, your friends will notice when you have resourced yourself, that ripple effect of you showing up as your best version of yourself, not just for them, but also for you. They're going to see that. I had a conversation with my daughter. She's 6.5 now. And we were talking about, like, what does mummy do for self-care? And she's like, mummy gets her nails done. She often comes with me to have that done. And the kind of compromise there is that she chooses the colours, and that's okay. But that's my time for me. But however, she's still there. And mummy does her journaling, or she's like, mummy writes in her book, and she's like, mummy goes to the gym. And I'm really in a privileged position that I can afford to, and I'm able to go to the gym once a week. But we were having a conversation about that, and I said to her, so, is mummy a better mummy if she goes to the gym? And she was like, yes. And it was like this, yes, mummy, you are. You have to go to the gym. Like, I notice the difference when you don't go. And so it's really interesting, if we flip that around and look at how they are seeing us as a parent, as a mum, and how we show up, because it does have a ripple effect. If we are exhausted and we are depleted, and I'm sure we've all been there, your child is doing whatever and you're getting quite irritated, perhaps it's in the school run and they're not getting dressed, and then you end up shouting. If we're able to approach those situations from a calmer space, then we're not going to feel guilty about shouting, and then, because we're not going to have done it. And so I think whichever way we look at it, that guilt is going to be there, whether we're not resourced and we are showing up irritable, shouty, etc., and then we feel guilty for showing up in that way, or we feel guilty for taking the time for ourselves. We're never going to escape it. And so when I talk to clients often about that, and even for me when I'm doing, I'm taking time for me, it's like, well, I'm going to feel that way. My kids, my partner, etc., are not going to notice or know that I feel guilty about that. And so ultimately that doesn't serve me. That's just, I know it's there. I know that there's very little I can do about it apart from work with it. So let's just park it, recognize it, park it here, wherever. I'm directing to the side, but that's my space where I put it. And still do that thing, taking 5-10 minutes for yourself is not selfish at all. And also, those self-care practices, as I said before, the things you can do with your children too. It doesn't have to be you need that designated hour slot. It doesn't have to be that. It could be that while the kids are in the bath, you put a podcast on, you put your headphones in and you listen to a podcast. It could be, after you drop the kids at the school run and maybe you're in that next chapter then of your day and you're going to work or you're coming home or whatever it is that you're doing, you put an audiobook on or you put your favorite playlist on. It could be that, you get to the school run 5 minutes early and you get out of the car and walk around. It could be while your kids are doing their activity, after school activity, weekend activity, that you do, you take your book or you sit with a podcast, audiobook, whatever. There's ways to change self-care up in a really simple, easy way that means that, our kids can be present. We don't need that allotted, designated time completely on our own. So, yeah, we're not going to escape that guilt, but let's just park it, let's sit with it because it doesn't serve us, and ultimately look for ways to add self-care in really, really simply, because it doesn't have to be this big expectation, this big pressure at all.
Yeah, so I just want to touch on a couple of things you said there. I feel like what you said about the guilt is really important. For me, that was very much what you've just said there is like, would I rather feel guilty for taking time for me, or would I rather feel guilty for being a shouty mum? And like you say, we're not going to get rid of the guilt. So, and I know straight away what I would much prefer to feel any guilt for, and that would be, I'd much rather take time for myself than to sit back at the end of the day. Like it happens to all of us where, excuse me, where we've been, we've lost our cool and shouted or whatever. But I think the guilt from kind of taking time for ourselves is a much easier one to have to sit with than from like something like shouting. So when you kind of put them side by side like that, for me, that's a really easy decision of what I need to do. And I also wanted to touch on what you were saying about like, so role modeling to your daughter. And this is something that I kind of, for me, and I've talked, some of my listeners will know this, I've talked about this before, is like when I'm kind of doing something, quite often I have to flip the narrative and think, right, hang on a minute, if that was my daughter's saying, oh no, I'm not going to do that, or oh well, no, I don't want to do that type thing, how would I feel? And quite often I'd be like, well, I wouldn't want them to do that. So I have to role model that to them. So in while we're talking about self-care, like you say, if I'm not role modeling self-care to my daughters, they're not necessarily going to find it easy to do that as well. If this makes sense, what I'm saying. But yeah, so it's just, I feel like these are really important points for all mums to hear, because it's sometimes just little things like hearing other people talk about little things like that that make us think, oh, hang on a minute, and can help change our mindset. Because it's like you've just said about fitting self-care in, like even when the children are around. I love reading. I read books all the time. But whilst my girls were younger, even though they were playing, I didn't ever feel like I could sit and read whilst they were playing. And it was only when I saw someone that I follow on Instagram quite a few times, and they'd be sat reading a book. And for me, that was like, wow, like the children are there and they're sat reading. And then it kind of, like I've just said, it made me think like, oh, hang on a minute, why can't I sit and read my book? If the girls are busy playing or they're doing something, I'm just sat there, or like busying myself doing something else. Why can't I sit and read my book? So yeah, I just wanted to touch on them points, because I think it's really important for other people to kind of hear. And if anyone's listening can kind of resonate with any of that, and it helps you change your mindset a little bit, well then, you know, it's all beneficial, isn't it? So you've talked about kind of, you know, doing things like, just, it doesn't have to be, self-care doesn't have to be a massive thing. And I guess it's kind of making it routine, making it become kind of like a habit rather than it having to be an extra thing on the to-do list. So what examples would you give of like ways we can practice self-care even when the children are about? Is there a quick fix?
So I don't think there is a quick fix. However, there are some really simple things you can be doing just to bring in self-care really easily that would take no more than like 30 seconds. So when we think about bringing those practices in, ultimately what we all need at that given time is going to be different. So I think it's really important to remember that when you start to explore what might work for you with self-care practices. I think it's also really important to remember that whatever you choose to do might not work in the way that you expect it to work, and that's okay. And if it doesn't, potentially that means it's not the right thing for you right now, or maybe there's a way that you need to change it up a little bit to make it work and fit into your life. So when I work with clients, and you know how I often talk about self-care is it should come from a more experimental mindset of actually, you know, well, if it doesn't work, that's okay, I tried it, and we're not adding that extra pressure of this has to be the one thing that works and it has to work now. It's going to take some time for us to feel that kind of effect of it. And I think it can be really useful to kind of flip that perspective as you were saying before, that, you know, if our kid was trying something and they were struggling with it or it didn't work, we'd help them problem solve to, we'll try it this way, or why don't you try that? And so we need to come at it from that same approach. So we're not adding that additional pressure and expectation, which we don't need to be adding. So really simply, one tip and one of the easiest wins is just breathe. And that sounds really simple, doesn't it? Just breathe. But what we want to be doing is taking some really nice deep breaths in and out. So in through our nose and either out through our nose or our mouth, whichever is most comfortable. Now that's something we can also do with our children as well, and we can model that. You know, when we are getting really overwhelmed, we are getting quite irritable, and maybe we're heading towards, you know, tears, etc., etc. We can also do that with our children. And I will quite often do that with my daughter. So we'll breathe in and out and we'll trace around her hand, breathing in and out. And that works really well. It just calms your nervous system completely. It's not going to fix everything. However, what it is going to do is make you feel grounded and present so that whatever you choose to do next, you are more present and in more control of. That's also a really useful tool to use when we are getting quite overwhelmed during the day, and we can just stop before we respond, whether it's an email at work, whether it's to our child, to our partner, whoever, that actually we just take 5 deep breaths before we respond. Because there's nothing that says we have to respond straight away. So let's just give ourselves that time and space before we do that. And ultimately, modeling that behavior for our children as well is going to help them respond better too. The more we do whatever self-care practice we choose to do, the easier it's going to be. However, that being said, life happens, things happen. And so if you forget to do it one day, it really doesn't matter. Just pick it up the next day and, you know, come back to it then when you remember. And a really good example of that is from my kind of experience of bringing in self-care practices is through journaling. And I started journaling again, the Christmas just gone. So I got myself a journaling book, had some prompts in there that I found really useful to use. And obviously, because I was off from my teaching role over Christmas and the kids were off school, there was no kind of real routine, and we kind of eased into that. And so I could just journal when I got up. There was no rush to get out of bed and get ready for school. However, then when I went back to work and my daughter went back to school, obviously that school rush is there and that morning routine can be a bit chaotic for us. So what I then chose to do, instead of, you know, trying to squeeze in that journaling practice in the morning before we left the house because it was just so busy, but then actually it didn't give me what I needed because it was just something extra to do. It was just adding to that rush. I chose to do that when I got to work. So you kind of compartmentalizing those different chapters of your day And then when I got to work, get my computer logged on, I just take 2 minutes just to sit and journal, like 3 prompts, a couple of bullet points, nothing massive, not writing reams and reams, with my cup of tea, and just take that time just to calm myself and recenter back into the day. So I'm ready for that next part. And I think self-care practices can be really useful with that because we can use them as and when we need to throughout the day. So I've spoken about a couple of really simple ways we can add in self-care there. So we can talk about breathing, doing it that way. We can also journal. And journaling, I think, also comes with these expectations and pressures itself, because it can feel like this huge task that actually you need to have, an hour, you need to be writing tons and tons. And actually, a couple of really simple prompts, or even using a book that has, the prompts in, can also be really useful. So some questions to consider in terms of journaling would be, what is my intention for today? So what do you want to achieve? Maybe how do you want to feel? What do you want to get out of today? Another really useful one is, what am I grateful for today? And you could do that in the morning or in the evening. And then also a couple of others which can be really useful, maybe further down the line when you've started to build that healthy habit, starting really simple and then adding extra bits in as you get more confident, as you find more time within your day to add those in really easily, is to consider, what really brought me joy today? And also, what can I learn from yesterday to help me today? So they can be 2 other really useful ones. In terms of reading, which is an absolute, you spoke about it before, is something that so many people did, perhaps before they had children. And then, as you were saying, it becomes really unachievable, perhaps to sit and focus during that time, or to, perhaps read the quantity that you were reading before, maybe a chapter a night, for example. And so actually then it's like, well, what's the point in me doing it if I don't get to do that? If things are really busy, as you said, you can sit and read while the children are there. If they're playing, if they're colouring, whatever, that quiet time together, is such a beautiful kind of shared self-care experience. Also, if actually reading a physical book is difficult, listen to an audiobook, or just read a page or a couple of pages a day, and really set that expectation quite low so that it is achievable, because even just a little bit you're going to get the benefit from. And it might be that an audiobook works for now, and then in a month, then maybe you can bring the physical book back, if that's where you're at in your life. Other really simple ways to bring in those self-care practices are things like, putting a playlist on while you're making tea or doing the washing. So sometimes those chores can be quite boring, can't they? Or quite kind of, we have to do them. They're a non-negotiable. And so let's bring in something that is also going to make that quite joyful. Let's put that playlist on. Let's have that kitchen disco while we make tea or while we do the washing. Let's listen to a podcast or an audiobook, or let's put our favourite TV show on while we're doing those things, So let's just really change it up. So actually, whatever it is that we are doing, we are adding that joy, we are adding that ease, we are adding that energy in as well. And those, they're just a few really simple examples. There's obviously others like moving your body, getting outside, those sorts of things too. But those ones that I've mentioned are really super simple, easy wins that we can add in as and when we can during our day.
And so what I'm getting kind of from you there is that self-care shouldn't be a chore. It should be something that lights you up. So what would you say to anyone listening who doesn't know what lights them up, who doesn't even know where to start?
So my first thing would be, look at what you enjoyed before you became a parent, and let's start there. So what did you used to do, and perhaps you had that time that was for you? What did you do? Perhaps make a list, and then from that, look at how you might add those into your life right now. And think about the ways that actually you might have to problem solve, change it up to make it work for right now, but just pick one to start with. So if we think about it, and I describe it as like an ice cream cone. So we've got the cone bit at the bottom, and that's the bit we want, the foundation, a really good solid foundation. And so we just pick one to try and see how it works. And one really small thing. So we're thinking about 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, nothing massive. We're keeping it really small, really simple. And then once we've kind of established that, then we can add, the ice cream, the different flavors, the sauce, the sprinkles, the flake, once we've got that really good solid foundation. And that might take some time to build. Now, if we start fancy right at the top, it's going to be very difficult for us to kind of keep the momentum with that and keep up with that. So let's start really, really simple. So ultimately, look at something that you enjoyed before, make a list, see which one or ones you can bring in right now, and look at where they're going to fit in. Some people find it really useful to write it down. So they've got it, as a kind of visual reminder of actually, or set an alarm, I need to do this, or to kind of start to build that healthy habit so you have that reminder. One thing I quite like is actually having that kind of more visual reminder. So I will leave my journal out when I get to work. So I'll unpack the stuff I need from my bag. I'll go and make my cup of tea, but I'll get my journal out. And often if I haven't got it out, I don't remember to do it. So I've not done it this morning because I didn't get it out when I got to work. However, I'll go and pick that up later at some point during the day. I think also with that, if you do miss it, like I've missed it this morning, and I notice the impact because I've not done it, and by no means, even though I talk about this, do I get it perfect all the time, because I don't. Life happens. Is just to give yourself that kindness and compassion to know that you can come back to it later when you have that couple of minutes. And if it doesn't happen, it doesn't matter. Try again tomorrow. Come at it from that same perspective we were talking about earlier. That if you were talking to your child or your friend or a partner and they, missed something or forgot to do something, let's just try again tomorrow. Absolutely fine. Or let's just do it now. And so really coming at it from that space of permission to have a go and see what happens. And also that kindness of compassion of, I deserve this time, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever. And if it doesn't work how I wanted it to, that's okay. I can try again tomorrow.
And I think one word you've said there is possibly what's one of the biggest things when it comes to practicing self-care, and that's permission. And I think so often mums just don't give themselves permission to do kind of the things that they want to do, need to do, because our children are our priority, aren't they? And in our mindsets quite often, because our children are our priority, we give them permission to do whatever they need to do, but we don't give permission to ourselves. So I think that's a huge thing that you've mentioned there. So just kind of before we finish, if there's anyone listening now that's kind of still sat on the fence a little bit, they're kind of like, well, I understand what you're saying, but I just don't see how I can fit it in at all. I haven't got time. I'm completely overwhelmed. Anything like that. What would you say, just as like a final thing to give them that push to help them understand that this is something that you need to do for you?
I would say if you're listening and you're really not sure and you're not convinced at all, and it absolutely feels like something that you just cannot add into your life right now, I would say just stop what you are doing right now. And obviously, if it's safe for you to do so, because if you're listening to this in the car, please do not close your eyes. But if it's safe for you to do so, just close your eyes or soften your gaze, whichever is easier. And just place your hand on your heart space and just take in 5 deep breaths, just in through your nose and out through your mouth or nose. And just with those calming deep breaths, just notice how you feel after you've done them, because even just doing that will make a massive difference to how you show up and your energy levels and how you resource yourself. So if nothing else, and you are still not convinced, or even if you are, just take those 5 deep breaths right now and just notice the impact that doing just that, like 30 seconds of just breathing deeply, can absolutely make to how you are and how you feel.
Thank you, Emma. Is there anything else that you would like to add before we go?
I think just give it a go, see what happens, and just allow yourself that permission and kindness and compassion to care for yourself in a way which is right for you.
If you've enjoyed this podcast, please don't forget to follow, share with other parents you know, and if you haven't already, please leave a review on the app that you're listening on. A new episode is released every Monday. Follow or subscribe to be notified when each new episode goes live. If you would like to be a guest on the podcast, please get in touch via any of my social media channels, website or email. Thank you to our guests for joining me on today's episode. It's been great to have you, and thank you to everyone for listening.